welcome to the third session of Halton Catholic District School Board's Parent Information Series. If you're watching this tonight, you're seeing a recording. We were hoping to do this presentation live, but we had some difficulty with our streaming software, so unfortunately, we weren't able to do a live presentation tonight, but we'll just carry on in any event. So my name is Jane Atchison. I'm the Acting Chief Social Worker at the school board, and I'm joined tonight by Glenda Brown, our Chief of Mental Health Programming, as well as Oliver Foisey, our Chief Psychologist. And together we're going to be introducing this session tonight, and it's called Parenting During the Pandemic, Fostering Hope, Resilience, and Positive Mental Well-Being. So a third lockdown was announced today by the provincial government. And while schools remain open in Halton, the lockdown certainly presents challenges for everyone who's feeling weary of the pandemic. There's real impacts on families and children who are experiencing feelings of isolation. Tonight's presentation about parenting during the pandemic is even more relevant than we had originally anticipated. So if you've logged into this series, we've had 2 sessions already, and you will know that the mental health and well-being team at the school board has worked to create 6 information sessions for parents. And the series was created because we know that the pandemic continues to impact all of us. Our intent is to share information with you over the course of these 6 sessions that will assist you in supporting your child in all aspects of their well-being. We know that there's been some tough times, and we want to support you in supporting your child. So if I could ask you please to join me in a prayer to start our evening together, then we'll do a land acknowledgement. And if you would please join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So this prayer is called Slow Me Down, and it's written by Oren Crane. Slow me down, Lord. Ease the pounding of my heart by the quieting of my mind. Steady my harried pace with a vision of eternal reach of time. Give me in the confusions of my day the calmness of everlasting hills. Break the tensions of my nerves with the soothing music of the singing streams that live in my memory. Help me to know the magical power of sleep. Teach me the art of taking minute vacations, of slowing down to look at a flower, to chat with an old friend or to make a new one, to pet a dog, to watch a spider build a web, to smile at a child, or to read a few lines from a good book. Slow me down, Lord, and inspire me to send my roots deep into the soil of life's enduring values, that I might grow towards the stars of our greater destiny. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And now we'll watch our land acknowledgement.
Each of us has a relationship to the natural environment, the land, water, earth, the habitat, and ecosystems. Land acknowledgements provide us with an opportunity to offer recognition, respect to the original inhabitants of the regions that we live in and work on. There are many things that we can do to go beyond simply reading a land acknowledgement script. To make it more meaningful, we need to consider that we are, in fact, acknowledging not only the ancestral lands, but also the historical and complex intersections of settler impacts on Indigenous histories, economies, ecologies, livelihood, well-being, and governance structures. A territorial acknowledgement is not an endpoint in the journey of reconciliation. Actions create conditions for true reconciliation and create a foundation for restoring, renewing, or developing a new relationship with Indigenous peoples. For hundreds of years, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Attawaddaron, the Potawatomi, the Wendat, and Lenape nations have sought to walk gently on this land. They assisted the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival in what was, at times, a harsh climate. Under consultations from elders, knowledge holders from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and 6 nations of the Grand River Territory, the Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, along with Halton Catholic District School Board, created this land acknowledgement.
Halton as we know it today
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis.
From the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawandaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lakes
are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today
on these treaty lands,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect
the four directions:
lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God.
We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone. I'm very happy to be here with all of you tonight. Again, my name is Glenda Brown and I'm the Chief of Mental Health Programming, and I work alongside Jane Atchison and Oliver Friese in leading the delivery of mental health supports to students here at HCDSB. We have a wonderful team and very talented team of social workers, child and youth counselors, psychoeducation consultants, and psychologists who will present each week on topics that are important to you as parents and caregivers. We are thrilled to have you join us tonight, and we hope that you will tune in each week to participate and view our parent caregiver information sessions. The chosen topics related to the needs of parents and caregivers that are identified on this slide are the result of consulting and seeking feedback from administrators through surveys, consultation with SEAC, our Special Education Advisory, and with administrators. The topics include mental health, anxiety, parenting during the COVID-19 pandemic, and raising a resilient child, along with ADHD and sleep. Please note that these presentations from the last 2 weeks have been posted on our board's website, and that allows you to view at your convenience. Enjoy tonight's presentation.
Hello, my name is Oliver Friese, and today Jane will be moderating a discussion between school social workers Rhonda Crawford and Patricia Webber-Callaghan on the topic of parenting during the pandemic. This and all other presentations will have resources at the end of the presentation that you can access for your support. Please note that your feedback is very important to us, and we hope you complete the feedback survey provided at the end. I hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation.
COVID-19 has likely brought about many changes to how we live our lives. Uncertainty, altered routines, financial pressure, social isolation, and for some worry about the virus and getting sick, and fatigue about how long this has lasted. Today we have an opportunity to discuss some common questions that are being asked about our kids and how they manage the impact of COVID-19. I'm pleased to have two of our social workers join us tonight to talk about issues of parenting during the pandemic and how we can approach our kids to foster well-being and hope that we will get through these unprecedented times. So if I can please introduce or have our two social workers introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rhonda Crawford. I am an elementary social worker here at the board, and I'm pleased to be able to speak to you tonight about the impact of COVID-19 on our kids. I know myself, I have kids, and I think we're all in this in terms of trying to figure out how we can support our kids so that we minimize any impacts. So thanks for having me.
And good evening, parents. My name is Patricia Webber-Callaghan, and I too am an elementary social worker at the board. And I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I hope you enjoy this presentation this evening, and we look forward to spending some time with you.
Thank you, guys. So as social workers in the system, we've been talking to parents and administrators, teachers, and children about the pandemic, about how it's impacted them, really these times are so unprecedented, and everybody's mind has turned towards how will this affect our children in the short term and the long term. I'm wondering, can you, Rhonda, maybe, and Patricia, speak to the pandemic and how it's impacting our children?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's really obvious that the pandemic is affecting everyone. It's really interrupted our lives significantly. You know, the sudden pivot to shut down and the pervasive feeling of uncertainty is causing many of us to experience some considerable stress. But what we know about stress is that some can handle more than others. And when stress goes unchecked, it can become more difficult and often lead to more mental health and physical health problems. So the key is, I think, to see stress due to COVID as something we are experiencing that is to be expected. It's going to occur. It's an anticipated reaction to change or a traumatic situation, such as the pandemic. And this is the case for our kids as well. And so I think the focus isn't so much about having it, rather about how we can maintain tolerable levels of stress and how we can cope. You know, I liken the pandemic as a bit of a traumatic event. It's something that was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and it's certainly impacting our ability to cope. So we know people have experienced crisis and trauma and traumatic effects before, and so the impact can vary for different people. Not everyone is going to experience trauma in the same way, and so the impact of this pandemic will also vary. But what gives me hope is that we also know when people have experienced traumatic events, they've been able to recover and they've been able to bounce back, right? So when we look at the impact or mitigating against the impact of the pandemic, it might be helpful to consider what strategies have allowed people to recover from stressful events. And I know we'll talk about that maybe at a later point in this discussion. But I know what I want to note is that what is curious about the pandemic is the pervasiveness and how long it has endured, Jane, you know, to your point around how long lasting it's been. And what makes it different from other events we have experienced is really our ability to cope is compromised given the need for physical distance. You know, this social connection and social support is often what buffers the impact of traumatic events. So I know there are very real tensions that arise for myself and for families, you know, in navigating physical distancing and the need for social connection to lessen the impact. But I offer that as a context as we discuss impact. But that said, I know we are seeing our kids experiencing some impact on the day-to-day, and that may look different depending on the child. Patricia, I wonder, can you speak about, you know, what you see as some of our kids experiencing right now in terms of the impact right now? I wonder if you could follow up on that.
Thank you, Rhonda. That what you say is so true. And I really want parents to understand, and for all of us to understand, that COVID is being experienced by each of us in a unique way. There is no right or wrong way. We're all individuals and we're all experiencing it in a different way, in a unique way. And that is the case for our children as well. So our children may experience a range of emotions. For example, they may appear anxious. They may seem afraid. They may be sad. They may be preoccupied. They may be tired. And they may also present with some physical symptoms as well, like stomach aches and headaches. And they may want to be closer and closer to you. They may want to be sure that you're with them all the time. And this is okay, because as Rhonda said, we're talking about a situation that's a tragic event. And therefore, when we experience tragic events, we need comfort. We want comfort. And for our children, our parents or our caregivers are our source of structure, routine, and safety. And so our children turn to us to help them to manage the pandemic. I think you also need to consider that some of our children may feel a significant loss because of the lack of connection with the people that they see on a regular basis, their friends, their teachers, their relatives. They're not seeing grandparents the way they used to. They're not having dinners the way they might have before. They're not able to go to the park, that sort of thing. So that their lives may be turned upside down. And so we, as the adults in our children's lives, have to be the ones to provide for them structure, consistency, and a soft place for them to land. I also think that it's important as parents that you talk to the children about the pandemic. Please talk to your children about the pandemic. But of course, you talk to them in words that they understand, considering their developmental stage. So that how you talk to a child who's in grade 8 may be different than how you talk to your child who is in grade 3 or 4. And it may be a different kind of conversation for the different children in your family, because each of your children in your family will experience the pandemic in a different way. Does that help, Rhonda?
Yeah, I think so. I find it really interesting when you speak about how children will be more demanding of attention, and that's what we're kind of seeing in on the day-to-day right now, is that they're demanding of attention. They might be more irritable. They may be complaining more, and that point around, different kids will react differently depending on their environmental conditions and that sort of thing, and the stressors that's affecting them. I think that's something that's worth sort of considering as we move forward in talking about this, for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was really interesting, very informative, and certainly I think things that we're seeing, you touched on a whole bunch of pieces there around the pandemic and impacts on children. Physical distancing is a new term that we've heard added to our lexicon since last March, and I'm wondering, the impact about physical distancing and how that relates to social distancing and the impact of that on our children. You've spoken to that a little bit. I'm wondering if you can expand upon that.
Yeah, I think we really are in unprecedented times, and it's very difficult to know how social isolation will impact our kids in the long term. We know that some families are maintaining social connections in different ways. So for this reason, social isolation is going to affect kids differently. But what we do know, to contain the virus, we've been told to stay apart to stay safe. And so by doing so, we're also saying social connections like hugging or being together is not safe. It's really a paradox of sorts, because physical distancing goes against what we as humans tend to do when we feel like we're in crisis or we're faced with stress. So we often want to gather and support each other when we're not in a good place. So when I think about impact of social isolation, perhaps the best indicator of impact is to look at how we're coping, because that will inadvertently affect how we respond and how our kids will be impacted. Like we just spoke about, and Patricia just mentioned, kids are going to have different ways of managing and responding to the pandemic and the isolation and the loss that comes out of it. Some kids are going to worry more than others, and some may be more impacted. And I think, for some kids, they might not even be that impacted, as some kids may be at a place where, they're at a developmental age where they may not necessarily understand that they've had a significant amount of loss of connection. And so that naivety and innocence may be the very protective factor that keeps them resilient. But I do think that there is some impacts around social isolation, and I don't know, Patricia, what do you think? Do you think that there are other things that we should be considering when we look at social isolation as it's impacting our kids?
I think that what you said is so true, Rhonda. And I think the whole notion of social isolation is one that we need to consider. The whole notion that we can't hug our grandparents. It's kind of weird to think that, we see people who we love and the ability to hug our grandparents, to hug our moms and dads. Moms and dads are probably, and our brothers and sisters are probably the only people that we know we can hug without having to worry about whether it's safe to do so or not. Mm-hmm. But when you consider, I often think about kids getting on a school bus at the end of the day, or running out of school at the end of the day. Especially girls, I see this. The girls run out of school and they run to their friends and they hug each other. And it's a natural thing that they do. And we're saying, maybe you shouldn't be doing that so much. Maybe you should be, taking a step back. And that is very, very difficult for kids to do. So kids feel that. Kids feel the impact of not being able to have that physical connection. And so they may act out. They may act out at home. They may act out at school. Parents may find a lack of cooperation with their children. They may find that their children are more sullen. They may find that the children aren't sleeping as well, that their children are not as settled as they typically would be, because I think they're worried. They may be worried about what's going to happen. Why is this going on? When can I stop washing my hands so often? When, when can I take the mask off? That sort of thing. And I think that for some children, social isolation for them means withdrawing into themselves. And that can be a concern for parents. What we say to parents, though, is that COVID will end. And we'll talk about that. COVID will end. The thing is, how are we going to make it through that time? How are we going to hang in there with hope that it's going to end? And one of the things that we want to say to parents is, you are the barometer for your children. You are the people who will help your children to do well through COVID. And I also want to tell you, paradoxically, some kids are doing okay with social isolation. Some kids are thriving. They don't have to go to school anymore. They can go to school virtually. So they do their work virtually and they're quite happy. They don't have to, for some kids, they don't have to worry about, getting into arguments with kids at school, bullying, the kind of structure that they prefer not to live with. They prefer to be at home, to do things the way they want to do, the way they want to do it, the way their parents want them to do it, so that it's easier for them. And we surprisingly have found that we have a number of kids who are doing really well with virtual school because they're happy being at home, they're happy being able to go to their room, read a book, and be content. And so that's something that parents need to think about as well. If your child seems to be thriving while being at home, there's nothing wrong with that. As I said before, COVID is being experienced differently for everyone. It's a unique experience, and it's okay. Rhonda, what do you think?
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think that that paradox around some are thriving and some are not are also conversations that are happening in our community and among parents and that sort of thing. And there's lots of worries that comes with, is this normal? And I think one of the things I'll say is, your kids, to your point, Patricia, is that, parents are a barometer for their kids, but also parents know their kids best. They know what their needs are. And if you tune into those needs, you'll be able to sort of respond in ways to mitigate against some of those effects of the pandemic and social isolation and whatnot, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great, guys. Thank you. And I think it's so important for parents to know what the potential impacts are and what they need to look out for when they're thinking about social isolation and how that is impacting their children. And I think that conversation that we just had is really going to go a long way in terms of helping parents understand impact. But can we also talk about how to minimize the effects of social isolation? Do you have ideas around that?
Yeah, some ideas, maybe more of an approach a little bit. I think, there is going to be some effects of social isolation. Like I said, we don't know if it's going to be long term, but I have a feeling that the first step the first step to supporting kids is to validate the reality that this is not easy. And balancing the need for connection with that of physical distancing is important. Patricia mentioned earlier, talk to your kids, be honest, right? And I think that that's a place where, letting your child know that you are also, struggling with, the impact of that social isolation. So knowing that they're not alone is also very helpful for our little ones as well. But outlets for social connection are still available. They might look different. And when looking at impact of socialization, we know as social beings, there's like a developmental need for social engagement. We want kids to learn relationship skills. We want to stimulate their brain development. But this isolation does not mean that there's going to be lags in their development of social skills, although the long-term impact may be still unclear. We do know that the convergence of high stress that's not managed and social isolation can kind of intensify the risk of difficulty. So when we think about impact of social isolation, we might worry if we separate, we won't feel connected, we run the risk of creating environments that can impact our responses and our ability to cope and possibly undermine child development. But at the same time, I'd like to think, and this is like language is a powerful communicator of where we're at, being physically distant doesn't mean being socially disconnected. Crisis and change happens all the time, and what establishes a child's ability to bounce back is the relationships that foster that undercurrent, that foundation of sense of the foundational sense of safety and security. And so The answer to minimizing the effects of socialization for me, or social isolation for me, is how we foster safety and security under the limitations of our world today. And this is where I think the focus of the relationship between caregivers and those in that immediate circle of care is so important. You know, it's those caregivers and those family members who are kind of in the kids' bubble. So as a powerful tool for connections, those relationships really can continue to grow. If we want to lessen the impact of physical distancing, I hate saying those words, we should amplify and harness the caregiver relationships, right, with kids, because we know what children need to feel safe and secure is really no different than when it was pre-COVID. Right. And I think that sometimes we think that COVID and pandemic has changed the rules for us. It has changed the circumstances, but the rules around how we support our kids really at the foundation is the same. So this really does give me hope, because as a hallmark for healthy child development, caregiver connection is an important building block for establishing like that sense of well-being. And I think we can reasonably say that if families are connecting meaningfully to establish that sense of security, despite what's happening in the world, children can thrive. But, you know, I do want to say, if caregivers can buffer the impact of socialization, it really is worth noting that it's the well-being of caregivers is so critical right now. So really, parent wellness is so important. Wellness, my wellness as a mom, you know, my wellness as, you know, as a partner to my husband or whatnot, because right now, for some, the capacity of parents and caregivers out in our community, it may be compromised due to stressors to the pandemic, right? And if we're compromised as parents, it's going to impact our ability to connect with our kiddos. So that's why it's important for us as parents to kind of tune into our needs and support our emotional need for connection and well-being, because only when we are in a good place can we kind of tend to our kiddos. So, you know, the strategy that I offer is very simplified. Take care of yourself, be mindful of yourself, and then connect with your kids and trust that your connections on the day-to-day, they don't have to be big, they don't have to be grandiose, but meaningful quality connections may be the very thing that will mitigate against some of the effects of social isolation. So, Patricia, do you have anything to add to that? I know that's a little bit.
I think what you just said, Rhonda, is absolutely the truth. It's absolutely the truth. And excuse me, on some level, it seems really simple. But when we as parents think about how we sometimes have to take care of ourselves first, and I know, Rhonda, when you and I talked about this before, you talked about being in the airplane and, you know, being able to put your oxygen mask on first and so on. It's the perfect example. We as parents need to take care of ourselves, because when our children start getting upset and anxious about what's going on, we have to be calm. We have to present calm, security, all of those kinds of things that help our children to feel good, because our children believe us. That's the thing we need to know. Our kids trust and believe us. So what I would say to you is to continue to be engaged with your children. Be active. Rhonda always says, be deliberate, be intentional. She says, go outside with your kids. This is our time together, our 15 minutes together. We're going outside, just the two of us, or just the five of us. We're going outside to go for a walk, or we're going to play. We're going to do something together. So be deliberate, be intentional. Be positive. I know it's hard. I know it's hard, but be positive. Model compassion. Be kind to each other. Kindness goes a long way. Practice gratitude. Practice gratitude. What are we thankful for? What are we thankful for? And also, adjust your expectations. Know when to just say, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. I'm walking away from this. This is not that important. It might have been important a year ago, but all of a sudden we're looking at the world very differently. And how important is whatever that's going on? For me, I have this huge thing about dirty dishes in the sink. Why can't you just put the dishes in the dishwasher? Is that a hill I'm going to die on? No, because the truth is, I can walk away from that. I can put the dishes in the dishwasher, and it makes everybody else happy. There's no need to get all stressed out about it. So I say to you, as parents, adjust your expectations, be forgiving, be deliberate and intentional as you spend time with your children.
That's such good information, Rhonda and Patricia, because really what you're talking about is you're validating probably skills, parenting skills that people have been using all along. But I think sometimes we worry that there's some magic out there that we need to sort of tap into to make sure our kids are okay during the pandemic. But I think, you know, the approach that you guys have talked about will be really helpful for people to internalize and really think about as they're parenting moving forward. Patricia, kids have really, you know, been through a lot in terms of things that they've lost over the last year. And that doesn't just mean, you know, death of loved ones, although some people have experienced that, but it also means loss of other things in their daily lives, their routine. Can you talk to us some more about that, please?
Okay. You know, talking about loss is really, really important when we talk about COVID-19. School Mental Health Ontario says that COVID-19 is a tragic event. And I think if we all stop for a moment to think about it, we'll realize that it's tragic. And it's tragic because it was unexpected, it came from nowhere, and it's affected all our lives to the core, okay? So we need to realize that all tragic events are taxing emotionally. On some level, it's taxing. And again, it varies from person to person. It may be more taxing emotionally on one child, less so on another. But the fact is that tragic events are emotionally taxing and that not everyone will experience them in the same way. Again, we go back to parents. Parents set the stage for how their children will react to COVID-19 and the impacts. And we've talked about that already. And so what I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you a little bit about grief, because with loss comes grief. So I want to talk to you about that. And I want you to know that a grief reaction may take a long time. There are no rules to grieving. And for each and every one of us, how we experience COVID and how we experience our loss and our grief may be different. I thought that it might be helpful if we use a framework for understanding grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks to us about. And it might be helpful for us to understand how our children might be feeling if we think about this framework as we go through COVID-19, and also importantly, think about our children's stage of development as we look at these stages. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the first stage of grief as denial. And I think we can all, and I know I always say this, and I'm sure anybody who's ever talked to me about this whole COVID-19 business, as I say, will remember that I was really enthusiastic in March 2020 about starting the March break. I'm telling you, I was looking forward to a great trip. And I love to travel by train. And so our family was going to travel to Montreal by train. And I was so excited about it. And people kept saying to me, I don't know if that's such a good idea, if that you should be doing this. I was like, no, it will be fine. It'll be fine. We'll all be back. Everything is going to be okay. And so that was my reaction to it. Total denial. And very quickly, it became a reality to me that this Montreal trip wasn't happening, and I need to come to terms with that. It's not going to happen. And it was shocking to me. And so the next stage then becomes a little bit of anger. And although I was somewhat angry about it, I was able, because I'm an adult, I was able to put it into perspective. But I think we need to look at what's happening with all of us right now. I think when it comes to COVID-19, there are a lot of us who are still in the stage of anger. Mm-hmm. We are really, really upset. We're upset. How much longer is this going on? How much longer can we live with such restrictions? And our reality is every time we turn the TV on, either the Minister of Education or the Premier or the Minister, the Medical Officer of Health is on telling us stuff that we're like, I thought we were getting better. We're getting better, but there are problems. So that this anger, the whole feeling of anger is just at times can overwhelm us. And so again, we look to our parents. If your child is feeling angry, how do you deal with that? And we've talked about this. We talk, we listen, we validate. So anger is the second stage of grief. The third is bargaining. So now we talk about, okay, if I, as a child, if I wash my hands, if I wear my mask, if I don't play with my friends in the park and I stay home and I do what I'm supposed to do, then I can get what I want, right? Not so simple. Not so simple. It is messy. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. And it's hard to explain. There are no easy ways to move through grief. And we are experiencing this right now. The next stage is depression, where we feel this overwhelming sense of sadness, such overwhelming sense of sadness that, when will life get back to what it was before? And that sadness is to be expected. It's normal. And you need to know that it too will pass. It will pass. But we can't skip it. We can't skip the sadness. It will overwhelm us. So we need to lean into it, as social workers say. We lean into it and we know that this will pass. And the final stage is acceptance. When we say, here we are. This is our new norm. Our new norm is going to be that we may all have to be vaccinated. I don't know. We may need to get to a point of herd immunity. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what the future is going to look like. Again, it's not easy and it's messy, but we have to reach a point where we just have to accept that this is what's going to be. We need to also know that ultimately, caregivers and parents provide our children with support, love, structure. They have the most important impact on our kids. And by and large, we're resilient people. We are resilient people. We go through difficult times and we come out on the other end. As if you think of it as an adult, many of you may have experienced the loss of someone very important to you, and you've gone through the stages of grief. But you know that on the other end, that you were able to get through it. Life may not be what it used to be. You may still wish for things to have been different, but you reach a point where you say, this is what it is, and I can't do anything differently. Mm-hmm. And I've done the best I can. I've been there for my kids. They have a soft place to land, and therefore we can accept that this is what's happening. Not easy, not going to be over in 5 minutes, not going to be over quickly. It's going to take time. Mm-hmm. And I would like you to think about those kinds of thoughts when you think about and see what your children are going through.
Mm-hmm. You know what, Patricia, when I hear you talk about that, I think about myself around loss and the roller coaster. So what is really unique about loss is sometimes there's it's a short duration. So, you've experienced the loss and then you can kind of move on with recovery. Loss for this year has been so fluid. I feel like I've been on a bit of a roller coaster where one day I feel like I got this. I know what I got. I know I'm feeling good about parenting and my job. And then the next day I'm angry and I'm upset, because I'm tired of this. I'm frustrated, and that sort of thing, right? I want to be with my family. And so, it's a roller coaster. And, you kind of mentioned it's messy. It's not orderly. And so one of the things that I see this loss, I see myself going through this about 100 times over the past year, right? It's a helpful framework because our kids are also going through that. So there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days and there's going to be days where they feel the loss more intensely, right? And so the framework kind of helps us sort of identify where we might be at and just to sit with that and validate and acknowledge those experiences and that feeling, because again, it's to be expected that we're going to experience this and we're going to have, it's hard, and there's going to be those moments of frustration and confusion and whatnot. So, that message around that framework really rings true when I even think about my own sort of experiences over the past year. So, yeah.
Thanks, guys. And I think really, if parents are seeing some behavior at home, this conversation around loss can help them almost just be curious, take a stance of curiosity around what might be happening for their child. Is there something around loss that they're coping with and they're dealing with? Because sometimes kids aren't able to use their words to tell us, right? So by you being curious and sort of thinking about these different aspects of what might be impacting your child, it might help you find a pathway forward in terms of how to deal with whatever they're presenting. And along that topic, the next thing that we really want to address is anxiety, because I know parents are worried about children feeling anxious. Everything that's happened over the last year has really piqued anxiety for many, many people. And children experience anxiety differently or express anxiety differently sometimes depending on their age. So are you guys able to talk to that at all, to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. Jane, I think this question comes up a lot right now, especially within the context of what we had talked about earlier in terms of impact of socialization or social isolation. My goodness, I run those words together all the time. But, this is a hard question to answer, because I think in order to appreciate what the answer might be, it's also important that we label anxiety as a normal and healthy and expected response to any situation that we see as a threat. I spoke about that in a session last week around anxiety and what that looks like. And for some, COVID-19 may pose more of a threat to others. So who becomes anxious is not an absolute. And I think that that's a theme that we've talked about in this discussion, is that it's going to be varied in terms of different temperaments and profiles for kids. But in the end, some may have more anxiety. But, I want to note that it's to be expected given our world has changed and we need to find a new normal. So I think the pandemic might exacerbate anxiety that may have been dormant or sitting there for some families or children. And it may come up and percolate a little bit more because of COVID-19 and the limits of social isolation. But what I want to highlight is, if it's left unmanaged, so if we have that anxiety and it's there, it's to be expected, then we can manage it. But if it's left unmanaged or unsupported, it can lead to more anxiety. And that's when we think, it's important for us to look at our kids' capacity to cope and manage their own stress and anxiety is not necessarily entirely up to them. They're looking to us as adults navigating this world, and it's up to us to kind of help them understand and appreciate what they're going through. So I kind of echo the message that seems to be that theme, or that, adults are an important piece to caring for kids right now and being able to support and respond to that. I mentioned last week, anxiety is just another word for feeling scared and worried. And so I think it's helpful to think about what kids and adults may worry about looks different, right? Kids can tend to think about what impacts them more directly with more immediacy, while caregivers and adults might worry more about abstract things. For example, when school was canceled, some kids might have been concerned about their math mark. Others might have been worried about their Nike shoes in the locker. Younger kids are seeing the playground closed and they might be worried, the swings are broken, I'm never going to get to play with the swings. But as adults, we can sometimes minimize these worries by dismissing their questions and not taking the time to reassure them and alleviate some of that anxiety and their worries, because we as adults are more worried about the gravity of the pandemic, right? We have big stuff that we're worried about, the impact on the economy or more grown-up stressors that might be impacting our family. So when there's a disconnect between what is a perceived stressful or anxious provoking question, we can sometimes respond in a way that can invalidate our kids. And so to minimize anxiety and impact, we can acknowledge and respond to these concerns, reassure kids. And what might seem silly from our perspective as an adult can, if we tune into it, it can validate them to provide that comfort and reassurance. So it's about meeting where kids are at. And, I did talk a lot about this concept of validation last week, and I do think that it's a really simplified, almost elementary kind of skill that we can use to sort of support our kiddos. But you know what, it really does a lot to disarm kind of kids when they're feeling intense emotions. So, again, the other point I want to make, that if kids feed off the energy of our parents and me as a parent, Again, I reiterate, the message that parents, you need to take care of yourselves. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can manage our own anxieties and our own stressors to make the world a safe place for our kids. And we know that when kids are exposed to more stress around them, creating opportunities to play and to connect, which we kind of talked about earlier, those are helpful ways, those are helpful strategies to regulate kids feeling stress in their world, because it kind of keeps things in balance and in check. So it's not all stress, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some things that they can look forward to, small meaningful things that they can look forward to distract them and to sort of help them feel safe. So that's sort of just some thoughts. Yeah.
Thanks, Rhonda. That's really helpful. And Patricia, I'm thinking of something you had said before, and it's along the line of anxiety. You talked about some kids being very happy at home. Things are going well for them because they're able to be home where they feel safe and secure. So maybe those kids who are feeling a little bit anxious, being out of the house, and they're quite happy being in the house, but parents are a little bit worried about what are we going to do when things maybe go back to normal. Can you speak to that at all, Patricia?
I think that when things go back to normal, whatever normal is going to look like, I think when we figure out what our normal is and we go back to that normal, I have hope that we will find our feet, that we will find our place that we left. It might be different, but because we have done all of those things that we've talked about security, structure, we've talked about being there for our kids, listening to our kids, validating our kids, the world may change and we may go back to something different. But if we are there, if we are present, if we are present for our children, I think we will be able to move forward, because I do believe that we're resilient and that we can do this. One of the things that we've also talked about is that when our kids go back to school, when our kids are in school, there are support systems in the school to help our kids. If parents are concerned about how their children are doing, there are people in our school that you can reach out to. So certainly we encourage you to reach out to the principal, the special education teacher, the child and youth counselor, the social worker. There are people in school who you can talk to about your concerns about your children, and they may be able to help you too.
Yeah, and you know what, I want to add on that, because I think there are some wonderings around kids who are feeling comfortable at home right now. What is it going to be like when we sort of push them back out into the world, right? You're kind of relaunching them back into that world, and they may be nervous and they may have some worries around that. And I'll go back to something that I spoke a little bit about and just touched on in the last series. We talk about how we can support kids with exposing them to stressors. So when we talk about exposure, we go slow and gradual. You don't want to just throw them into school and just go full on. You might want to sort of have conversations with them to build up their confidence, to build up their understanding of what the new world is going to look like. You facilitate by, walking by the school, and I'm using the school as an example because obviously that's our frame of reference, but you might over the summer, if kids are struggling with that whole idea of going back and what the world would look like, you might be walking by the playground, you might be just exposing them to the school, parking lot and talking about what school's going to look like. So when we talk about exposing kids to any type of environment, whether that's because you've never taken to the grocery store all year because you've exercised some physical distancing, you want to get them back into feeling like our world is a safe place, not just the home. And so how we do that, if your kid is anxious, is you talk to them about it, you reassure them, you validate those feelings, and you go slow and gradual and build them up. If we do go too fast and we just push them out there, they may not be ready. So again, we go back to what we spoke about earlier. You are the barometer of your kids. You know your kids most. And if you see them having some hesitation or some anxieties, don't sit on it. Listen to it, tune into it, and ask for, support. If you're not sure, and, Patricia, I do appreciate you sort of highlighting that, we work in the schools. There are supports in the schools that can help you determine whether or not this is within the norm, or if this is something that you need to tune into a little bit more and be more strategic about. So, I offer those little points in terms of, just if you have more questions around that, check out the series if you didn't see it last week, and it might be helpful for you to sort of put in perspective an understanding of what anxiety is going to look like as we move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. And that's very true that the session from last week is already posted. You can go onto the board website and find last week's session where you can get some more information. And each week the series will be posted onto the website, so you can review all of them if you want to do that. But school, as you said, is our frame of reference, and lots of people are worried about what is that going to look like in terms of the impact of pandemic on learning and school. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
I think, again, the impact on learning can vary, right? So considerations for the unique learning profile of a child is something that we need to keep in mind. Some kiddos are going to have a high aptitude for learning and really thrive. They may not be that impacted by the on and off again of the school system or the virtual learning and whatnot. And so they may be doing well, but while others might be struggling, right? They might not have a temperament who can manage the hot and cold of school right now. Or they may be distracted because, they're feeling less focused and less engaged just in general, right? We're all experiencing stress. So it's to be expected our kids are not at their best. And we know kids struggle with learning when they're feeling like they're preoccupied with other things, right? So we know that if kids are not feeling great, then they may miss foundations of learning. They may miss some of those things. And the worry then becomes that, as we start to move into a new normal, and I feel like we are in some sort of a new sense of normal now because our kids are in school, thankfully. One of the things is that if kids are experiencing gaps in their learning, that is going to be an added stressor for their return to school. And we know when there's added stressors, then they may become more anxious. So again, what I would say is if you're worried about your kids, either academics or their anxiety, whatever the case may be, talk to your teacher. Engage school supports. Now is the time more than ever to reach out and connect with the supports that are out there. We've armored up in our board, we've armored up in our community to be available to our families and our kids so that we can really support you. And it's really an opportunity for you to take advantage of that home to school connection, and I think that the school team can be a support to you. Patricia, do you have anything to add about that? Because I know it's hard to predict, right?
It is hard to predict. And I think that the thing that is important is that you need to know that the school is wanting to help you. The school is there, and the principal, staff, teachers, they are there to help you, and they want to help you because they know that for all the children, it has been different. It's been different. Some kids feel it more than others. Some kids are more worried about how they've done. Some are less worried about gaps in learning and so on. But it's all there. The teachers and the principals are aware of it, and they are there to help you because they have to deal with this for everyone. They have to deal with it for everyone. So know that your child is a unique being who you need to talk to the school about, and the school's there to help.
Thanks, guys. And I think that's one of the things that everybody's just sort of managing is some questions and maybe some thoughts around what's it going to look like from that academic point of view, but really, good words of advice from the two of you. So when we've talked a lot about, worries that we have around the pandemic and impact of the pandemic. I'm wondering if you can speak to, just ideas around bolstering well-being for children, overall well-being for them, as parents are sort of navigating this time with their kids.
Jane, I think the reality is everyone is doing the best they can to support their kids. Some families might be struggling more than others because of finances or other challenges that are, have existed pre-COVID. How we support our kids is going to vary. It's not a one size fits all. In general, I feel like it might be helpful to look at it as an approach to parenting versus, a grocery list of strategies, right? And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. And sometimes I feel like it's hard for me to even give advice and offer this because I have been on this roller coaster with people and I've not been the best parent some days and I've not been, at my best. But, Small strategies, I'll reiterate some of the stuff that we talked about, right? Connecting with our kids. We talked about, minimizing impacts of socialization. Parents can connect in their everyday interactions, taking a moment, showing interest, paying attention to notice what they are noticing, supporting them and encouraging them in the moment, and reciprocating in small and meaningful exchanges. That could be about a cartoon or a TikTok video, right? It could be, a board game. It doesn't have to be a grandiose activity. So set realistic expectations for yourself as a parent, because you are managing other things. Small things can have big impact. So it seems like a simple answer to say we can help kids with connection, but I do think that it is a foundation for mitigating, what's happening right now. For lack of a better analogy, I know that you talked about earlier, Patricia, that whole idea of traveling on a plane and there's a loss of air pressure. Put your mask on before your kids. Self-care is so important. And I don't mean go get a massage or, anything that's grand. Again, self-care could be take 5 minutes extra in the shower and just breathe. Take a break from your family, go for a walk, whatever the case may be. Watch your favorite TV show. Change. The reality is the world has changed. That's a reality that we have to accept, and part of that is managing what we can control. Understand there's things we can control and can't control, right? As an approach to managing all of this, the pandemic, the directives of physical distancing, impact on work and school, those are all things that we can't control, and that can cause us to feel very stressed. It's a typical response to change when we don't have some control. We were forced into this. We didn't choose a world to change. So, sometimes it's helpful to set priorities and what you can focus on, right? And make it so that it's manageable for you. Accept that, there's going to be limits to what you can do. And with that, be flexible, right? The pandemic has called upon us to really be adaptive, right? We're forced into this change, and the reality is what we're managing is difficult. So having to be flexible, and I think, Patricia, you spoke about it earlier, maybe modeling compassion, but also modeling flexibility, so that we can show our kids, we got to roll with the punches, change it up with, with what's going on. And we've been forced to do that when schools have opened and closed and whatever the case may be. And those are things that might be helpful. And I think one of the things, we talk about is adjusting our expectations. Patricia, you spoke about that. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but adjust our expectations, know when to tune in, know when to tune out. Don't get overwhelmed, around that. And it's okay to be selfish and sort of let things go. And one of the things that I've done myself is I've actually had to limit exposure to news media, right? Dialing down the negative, dialing back on the misinformation, all of those things that are out there, because when we fill our bucket with all the things that are happening that may be the what ifs, the unknowns, all of these things, it actually creates our anxiety too. So sometimes we focus on what we can control, and that's the day to day. Patricia, do you have anything to add on that in terms of how we can sort of support children's well-being during this pandemic?
I think you did a great job, Rhonda. I just want to add two things. Okay, I think that it's really important for parents to reassure their children that as a family, we will get through this. You're not alone. We will get through this as a family. And I also think that it's important that parents enjoy the time with their children. There are days when you don't want to. Honestly, some days you just want to go to bed and let things just happen. But when you have those moments, enjoy them. Enjoy them. And remember that joy will come back. There will be joy in your lives again.
Thanks, guys. And when I hear your talk about well-being, I think what comes to mind when I hear about having fun with your kids and joy and relationship and connection with them and flexibility in parenting, I think about simple opportunities to engage in that, like having dinner together, either every night or a few times a week or even once a week, and just all of those things can come together beautifully as you sit around the table and eat together or, play a game together. So, as the ladies were saying, finding those simple opportunities to really connect with your kids and enjoy your kids, it can be a really wonderful opportunity to increase everybody's well-being right now. in terms of the presentation, really, we're done at this point. However, we do have some community resources that we wanted to talk to you about and that are available for you. And there will be a slide at the end of the presentation that you can review, and that will be a part of the recording that you can then look at if you want to do that. Does anybody want to speak to just quickly the resources that you might recommend for people?
For sure. So just so everyone knows that we have resources in the community that families could reach out to for help if they're very concerned about their kids, if they've tried everything to try to help their children to feel better and they're not feeling like there's any movement and they're concerned. In Halton, we have the Reach Out Center for Kids, ROC, and ROC is our lead agency for mental health services for our children. So the phone number will be on the screen. Call them. If you have concerns about your children, call them. What they do is they will decide what is the most appropriate agency in Halton to provide service for your children, and they will direct you in that vein. So you can trust that they will do that. ROC has a 24-hour crisis line. And so that if you are ever in a situation where you feel like you need help right away and you need to talk to someone, please call the crisis line and they will help you. Another place that you could call is the Kids Help Phone. They too are available 24/7. There's someone on the end of a phone that you can talk to who can help you. You can call the police. If there's an emergency and you are worried about safety, absolutely call 911. And as we come to an end, there are a couple of things that I want to say to you. One is that I hope that you would consider what your cultural supports are and what your spiritual supports are. We all have connections, whether it's with our families, whether it's with organizations in the community. Those things are important because ultimately our cultural and our spiritual supports help us to make it through when things are not going well. So we encourage you to reach out to those supports if you need them. Mm-hmm. And my final thought is, I believe that we're all resilient people. And I want you to know that COVID-19 is a marathon. It's not a sprint. There's no quick and easy answer to what we're going through. We are resilient people. We can do it. We need to support each other. We need to reach out for help when we need it. And resilient people do that. We reach out when we need it. And so we hope that this evening has given you some information, some ideas about what you can do and where to go for help. Rhonda?
Yeah, I echo everything that you had just said, Patricia, and I do hope that the nuggets of conversation that we had helps inform just a perspective of how to approach COVID and how to look at it. We don't have the magic answer to what how things are going to be better or whatnot. We're just, offering some ideas around what we know it might be helpful to people. And I think the biggest thing is now is not the time to try and just manage. Like, if you need help, reach out to those services that Patricia spoke about, talk about it, engage your group, your peer groups and your faith so that you can sort of feel connected and engaged in ways that can help you get through these times. And I think that's pretty much what I would leave everybody with. We're in it together. We'll figure it out.
We're in it together.
We're in it together. Thank you so much, Rhonda and Patricia, for all of your insights tonight. It's been super helpful and I think really relevant for people. So we really appreciate everything that you've done tonight to bring this information to us. And just a reminder to parents that if there's a specific section that you want to sort of review or look at again, you're welcome to do that. This will be posted through our board website, and you're always welcome to access that. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
So this concludes Patricia and Rhonda's and Jane's fantastic conversation and presentation this evening. On behalf of our team, we would like to sincerely thank you for bringing your vast experience and professional expertise regarding parenting during the pandemic and how it relates to everyone's mental health. Hopefully you have found this information helpful and supportive to you and your family, especially during these challenging times. And like referenced during the presentation, we have provided some resources for you for your reference and support.
Please note, there will not be a presentation next week due to the April spring break. This was the third of 6 sessions, and the recording will be posted on the website. As previously stated, you can view at your own leisure, and you can also review the first 2 ones whenever you have time. The next parent caregiver info session is on Wednesday, April 21st, and it's called Family Matters, Raising a Resilient Child. So it really continues this conversation from today. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We know how busy everyone is, and we hope that your time spent with us tonight has been helpful and enlightening. It would be very much appreciated if you could take a few minutes to provide us with feedback regarding tonight's presentation. We have included a QR code, that's that square that you can see on the slide. This will help us to provide your feedback. For those of you who are not familiar with QR codes, you simply open your camera on your phone and hold the camera in front of the QR picture. Once your camera zooms in on the code, you will receive a feedback survey. You can do this now while the QR code is on the screen. Many thanks to those of you who do complete the survey, and please know how much we value and appreciate your feedback. Have a wonderful evening and good night on behalf of the team.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.